Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith. Composer of the award-winning feature films Piece by Chocolate and Botero, David Bertok writes for film, TV, and the concert hall. After graduating from music college in Germany, David enjoyed a busy career as a live musician touring Europe with his progressive rock bands opening for acts such as Scorpions and Saga. His band Subsignal reached the German album charts twice during his tenure as keyboarder, songwriter, lyricist, and producer. In 2012, he relocated to Los Angeles on a Fulbright Scholarship, admitted to the famed scoring for motion picture and television program at USC. David's creativity extends to songwriting, producing, and more. And after 12 years as a composer for media, David is branching out into the world of concert music with his most recent project, One, which will be released in October. So David Bertok, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thank you for having me, Christine. Great to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you. I love classical music too. And so I was able to listen to a little bit of your album and I loved it. I thought it was so fun to listen to. So I can't wait to talk with you about your process in creating it. And I love how your career it seems to have expanded across many, many genres. And I'm excited to hear about that. So let's jump into it. How did you get into music? Did you always want to be a musician?
I think I did, yes. I mean, my earliest memories are of me just being obsessed with music and having my headphones and listening all the time. And, playing my own little compositions on the piano and ignoring the practice I was supposed to do. So I remember when I was, I believe, 13, I was like buying soundtrack or score CDs, The Rock by Hans Zimmer was my first one. And then the next day I bought some rock album and was listening to Pink Floyd and Genesis. So it was, for me, always just everything in music was so exciting. And I picked up the guitar then, and it was just something I just couldn't be without. And it's I followed the music. I think the music was kind of calling me and I just went along for the journey.
Yeah. So what's the music education like in Germany? Is it mostly like private? Like you said, you had a piano teacher, or is it through the schools?
Well, that's a big question. We can talk a lot about that, and the good and the bad side. The short answer, I did my undergrad in Germany. I did classical piano because I did want to go to college for film music. So back then there was only one program and I didn't get in. And, some of my mentors or other colleagues told me, hey, just to, learn an instrument or like pursue really getting a degree with an instrument. And then you can always on the side, and then you can continue being, practical and do the film music after. And so that's what I did. I then practiced really hard and applied to music college for piano. And that's also something that's can be very challenging because you compete with people who have only done that their whole life. And what I mean by that is, if someone maybe isn't creative on an instrument, but they are just practicing, right, all the time. So they're focusing all the time to that performance. But I knew, okay, there are like these people around that have been only doing that. So, then I took a few years. I was like really focused on the practicing and being at the piano. And I did actually 2 degrees. I did a classical piano degree and a jazz pop degree. And so even more things to keep me busy, right? And and then after my music college education in Germany, all along I was like playing in bands and already started to tour with them. And I also worked as a orchestra musician in like musical theater productions in Germany. And after college and after kind of like 10 years in that world of being more a performer, meanwhile I was still composing on the side, right? But it wasn't, I wasn't like scoring films. I wasn't doing this for professionally in terms of getting paid for that. So then I heard of that film music program at USC, and it was kind of like, this is it, It's in Los Angeles, the center in the universe for film music. And it's a fantastic program because it brings you into the industry and connects you with other composers that might need help. So after the program, I started working for other composers, orchestrating for them, assisting them on their projects. And that helped me to kind of, get my, start here in the city where there's a lot of competition, and also basically make the move over to the US and survive here. After almost like 10 years LA, my wife and I took a short break and went to Germany during the pandemic. And I was able to get a grant from the German performing rights organization, GEMA. So they represent me in Europe, and I'm with ESCAP for the rest of the world. And GEMA gave me this grant to compose basically this album, or to have the funds to record it and to record live musicians. So after I had sent in my proposal and gotten the grant, I'm like, cool, yes, now I can basically do this like concert music album that, there's not a film behind it. And, all the previous releases I had in the last years, there was always a film attached, which is great and fine because you kind of get the audience and the people who watch the film. But this was basically my show, right? So I could like do the pieces I wanted to do. And yeah, and that was exciting. So I decided to, dive into that when I had a little bit of downtime between films, dive into that album and producing it and writing it. And I ended up doing kind of like a nice mix of older pieces that I already had that I never got the chance to record with live instruments, and some new pieces that I specifically wrote for this album that is coming out.
Wow. So I think it's safe to say that you do not buckle under pressure.
Well,
right. I mean, you think about like a piano performance degree. I have a piano performance degree too. And
nice.
I know about the competition. I do. And so, so that is very competitive. And then you did another one, a jazz one, jazz pop on top of that. And then you came to one of the most, difficult and competitive like careers in film music. So hats off to you. That's amazing. How do you kind of keep your head from exploding from all the pressure?
A good question. When I went to music college, and some of my teachers were like, yeah, but David, you're doing so many things, and I think you should just focus on one. Just either do only classical or only jazz and then all that creative stuff. And, looking back, this is exactly not just what saved me, but what enabled me to have a career, because I was doing all these different things. And especially as a media composer or as a film and TV composer, you don't know what the next project is going to be that you're going to be at, what style it's going to be in. And you have to, you don't have like 1 year to go and study that, right? So you have to be pretty quick. You have to be good at improvising sometimes. You have to be good at quickly kind of digesting, okay, what are like the key elements of this style? What do I have any, experience in it already? Or how can I, quickly get into that mindset of that world? So I think it was great to have these many different things I was doing before I started as a media composer, because it definitely helped me.
Yeah. And now with this new album though, I think it's kind of sweet that you've come back to classical after all that. With all this experience, you just kind of, I don't want to say come home, but you said your first lessons were in classical. So why did you want to do neoclassical for this album?
I always, was drawn to that aesthetic, and I was always drawn to this approach with real instruments. And by real instruments, I mean real live performed and recorded instruments. And, especially in the last 2 decades, when the sampled instruments gotten really good from a certain perspective, and in the film and TV world, there's been a big shift to using more and more sampled instruments, and which is great. And there are practical reasons why that is helpful. Sometimes on a deadline, and sometimes there's a quick edit, or, and you don't have to like go chop off the performance, but you just move around the MIDI and hey, here's a new track. So that has been a big shift in the film music industry. And I, whenever I had a chance to record live instrument in the film project, it was such an exciting process because the performers, they really elevate the music. Yeah, they
Hmm.
come in and they have a certain human touch that I think, especially in today's world, we have AI looming, and people are worried, will it take over, or what is human creativity necessary? And I think particularly under that aspect, which I wasn't thinking about when I composed this album, but now it's like so fitting that I'm doing this and it's coming out. I'm so excited and behind it because the live instruments and the performers, that's something you cannot replicate, right? So when you have a piece with 30 string players, and they play this well, and each of those musicians has practiced this instrument their whole life, and they're just so
Right.
fantastic at bringing emotion into it. You cannot replicate that. Not even I don't think that is something that the AI will actually be able to do, because it's such a vast array of information and so much perfection and imperfection. So that is
Hmm.
something I'm very excited to have on this record now, these performances. And yeah, I'm not sure what your question was actually about. I think this is my answer.
It's a great answer. Well, it does make me think that this idea of AI has made you appreciate live performances even more. Do you think that's going to kind of happen in society? That there's going to be kind of like I don't like kind of not a pushback, but sort of a greater appreciation for the craft of music and music making?
I really hope so. I really hope so, because I think this generation of young musicians, they sometimes don't know what they're growing up with. And I mean, that's
Hmm.
in a little bit concerned way. I know there's all these advantages to have with, like, I just turn on my computer and I have everything at my disposal. But I feel like
Right.
what is missing today is to have a little bit of time to go along with the journey. And sometimes the time that you spend with something, it makes it precious, and it makes you go deeper. And I think
Right.
even the fact that the kids these days, kids these days grow up with a streaming service, and they don't have this kind of connection that maybe you and I grew up with. I'm assuming that, I bought this record and I'm going to listen to it for 3 months. And I
Right.
was waiting for my favorite band to release a record for 3 years, and now it's coming out. And, this kind of, or I'm studying the booklet. Oh, wow. Yeah. This guest musician played on this track, right? Oh, wow. It recorded in
Hmm.
this studio. I want to know more about the studio. And there is so much information, and it's great, but I think it makes it harder for us to, put some appreciation and put some, you know, weight behind things. And I think that is just like the listening experience. And I think the tools that the kids grow up with today, they are fantastic, great. Yes, you have a sequencer and you have all the sounds in the world. But again, you kind of become a little bit more passive and selective, right? So I think the whole idea also with AI, like, okay, well, all you have to do is write a prompt, right? But the whole process, I mean, I can't even imagine honestly enjoying that process. And all
Right.
the greatest experience I had in my life were on this journey, right? And we're on this journey with obstacles and challenges, and like, okay, now I really have to be creative. I have no idea what to solve it. And I think when humans start to like have everything ready, like, okay, hey AI, tell me the answer to this, or hey AI, just create a track like this. What is the whole process? Where's the learning experience for you to grow as an artist, to grow as a creative? And I think that is exactly what AI cannot do. I think AI cannot have you an experience, cannot help you have an experience, cannot help you on your creative journey. Yeah, I
Right.
think, you know,
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your process, because for media, usually you have a picture or something to score for, but one was completely just you. So, how did you go about that? What was your composing process for this?
yes. So I think I mentioned already, I it is a mix of older pieces and new pieces that I wrote specifically for this album. So what had happened over the
Mhm.
years, I wrote a lot of music for film and TV. And when you write a lot of film and TV music, you also write a lot of music that will end up on the shelf because it gets rejected,
Mhm.
or maybe it doesn't fit, or the scene was thrown out. And sometimes you build this kind of, shell. You're like, no, I'm not precious about it. I'm just move on. But pieces, stuck around with me and were like, oh, I really like this piece. And I wish one day I would have the chance to record it with live instruments. So that was one smaller portion of the pieces that just, have been around. And I'm like, yeah, one day I'm going to come back to them and record them. And I did so some of those pieces, I revisited, I extended all of them because sometimes they were just, like a short 1-2 minute thing. And I went in and
Mhm.
was like, okay, if I'm thinking album and I'm thinking, there's no limitations. I don't have to serve a picture. I'm serving only the music, the art. So what else will I do to this piece? And, for the most part, the integrity of the piece I kept intact, but usually just expanded on it. And the other portion of the songs, they were all songs or pieces that, for the first time in many years, I'm like, okay, I can just write whatever I want. No, wait, how does this go again? Because that's, when people start being creative, kids or teenagers, they don't have this kind of, hey, you have an assignment or you have a job, you have a
Right.
deadline. So it's like, oh, I really
Yeah.
like this idea. So it was a wonderful full circle moment to come back to that, which brought me to music, right? It's that kind of like free form association, like, hey, what is in you? What is in you today? Like, go listen and come up with something or not. And I also luckily didn't have like a super strict deadline on the album, so I was just rediscovering being creative without I almost want to say without a purpose, which is makes it
Mhm.
very liberating and scary too, because it's like, how will I then judge and how will I decide and choose? Yes, this is worth pursuing. This I'll push this idea to the finish line, or what
Yeah.
about this idea and how do you compare it? So I kind of just made intuitive decisions about most of these pieces, and the pieces that ended up being new pieces added to this album, all of them had some kind of, I had an emotional connection to them and I had some kind of attachment that came out in some creative burst where I didn't even know what I was doing, basically. It wasn't like a conscious, hey, I'm going to compose a piece like this, but I was experimenting. I was usually improvising on the piano and maybe capturing ideas or not. And then kind of looking back, wow, there's something really here. I should go back to this. So it was a
Oh,
very,
wow.
very different process than in the media music, very free and liberating, but also scary because it's kind of asks more of you personally. It kind of, um, you feel a little bit naked, you feel a little,
Right.
okay, what is in you? Okay, tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Can be a little daunting, I
Sure.
would think.
It's,
Yeah. Um, what do you think your favorite piece is?
yeah, it's very hard to choose favorites, but uh,
Right.
the first piece, it's called Loon Dance, and it's probably the oldest or second oldest piece on this album. It's actually a piece I composed with samples many years ago when I bought this new full sample library. I'm like, oh, wow, all these sounds, I'm excited. And then I'm like, one day it'd be cool to record it with the real instruments. And I have a very different, very um, colorful instrumentation on it. So there's flute, oboe, there's a horn, there's a voice, there's strings, there's a harp. It's a very unusual, actually, instrumentation on it. And yeah, so
Mhm.
classical voice, right? So a little bit operatic. And I produced it with samples. Actually, it was one of the pieces I applied to USC with. And I sent in 3 pieces and it seemed to have worked, yeah, because I got in. So you know, it was sitting on my hard drive for many years, and I'm like, okay, well, here's the chance to record it live. And I always liked the piece. It
Mhm.
was it was a nice, interesting journey. Had a lot of interesting harmonies. And yeah, so I think if I had to choose one, it would probably be that. But there are other pieces I love too. One of the pieces got nominated for an award recently for a Hollywood Independent Music Award. So that's the latest single I've released from the album called Fontana dell'Anima, and it's kind of Baroque sounding piece. It's there's a lot of counterpoint in it and streets, these convoluted things. And I got to record it in my hometown in Bratislava, where I was born and lived until I was 6 years old. So, I love recording there because I have this connection to it. And there's an amazing radio hall where I recorded a lot of my film scores. And I know the orchestra conductor there and some of the musicians. So I love going back there and recording that place. So maybe those two pieces, if I have to narrow it down.
Yeah. Now, wait a minute. Because there's a lot of counterpoint in that second one. Were you saying like you improvised counterpoint, Baroque counterpoint?
I would say I improvised it per se.
Okay, because I'd be like, wow.
You got it. Really did. Hey, did you improvise it? Bach probably would have improvised that piece, on a like lazy afternoon. But it is interesting though to be in that, and you bring up an interesting point because, back then. That's centuries ago, right? And humans were, we probably don't even have an idea of how different humans were. I mean, when we read letters from that time, we're like, oh, wow, this is how they talked. Okay, this kind of, convoluted and sometimes very, expressive and these, long sentences and this like,
right.
a very interesting language. But we hear it in the music, there's so much craftsmanship and so much skill, and Bach was someone who was able to just improvise in that style, would like come up with a theme and here's the counterpoint and I'm throwing in another theme. So this was a super interesting and humbling process for me to, attempt this. But then once I got into it, I was obsessed and it started to work really well. And yes, I didn't have to improvise it. I come back to it, I have to tweak. But it was so much fun because, I had in my head this idea of like, wow, and you have these live strings then, and the cello do this, and, the violas respond with this. So it was such a fun piece. And, I was really excited that then it got recognized for this award because I wouldn't have thought, a lot of neoclassical pieces, and we could talk more about it, usually gravitate towards maybe more minimal music, which is great too, and I love that too, and I have some of them on my album as well. But I feel like that kind of really challenging aesthetic of like Baroque music, where you have polyphonic music, you have multiple ideas going on at the same time. That doesn't, it's not being used that much. So I was so excited to try and was relatively pleased with what I came up with and
relatively pleased. I listened to it. I was more than relatively pleased. I thought it was beautiful.
People seem to have been too, hence maybe the award nomination. But I'm of course always a very harsh judge of myself. And especially with neoclassical music, sometimes the argument is like, why do you do this? Like, hey, we have like 100 years of like amazing pieces from that period. But I always say, there's, and in all of my pieces, I think when listeners listen to it, there's a certain modern touch to it. So there are certain aesthetic considerations that maybe wouldn't have made sense in the 1600s and 1700s. And there is a modern touch to some of these pieces, some of these elements, and some do sound cinematic. I mean, definitely 2 or 3 pieces, people will say, hey, this could be in a film. This is a full music piece, right? And some maybe not.
So you had all of these pieces, and you had some of them you had written on your DAW. But then did you have to tweak them at all to get them recorded by live musicians? That seems like it would be quite the process, because then you'd have to like prep the scores and get that all edited so that they could. What was the steps between composing it, maybe having it on your DAW, to actually having it recorded?
I mean, it's a very interesting process. The process usually similar in the film music world, where you have it in your DAW and now it's like, okay, turn it into sheet music. So I went back and took the MIDI and put it into Sibelius and started, all my dynamic marks and my phrase marks. But what it also does is that, okay, you're now going to record this with a human. So of course, when you're in the sample world, you sometimes don't think about, oh, is this really playable? Is this really something that a player would do? And is this really where you get the most bang for your buck? Is this something that will bring out a good phrasing or bring out good dynamics? How is the relationship with them, with the different instruments? Because when you're in that sample world, you can, adjust levels as you please. And
Mhm.
it was a great moment to go in and be really hands down, like, okay, I'm in the recording room with these 8 instruments. How is the balance gonna be? Okay, how can I bring out this line? How can I bring out this melody? What is the overall arc? So I think that is important. And then maybe kind of going back to what are tools that make it easier today, but also what are tools that kind of make us lose a certain skill, you know, uh, you know,
Mhm.
collectively, because when we are less and less exposed to live performances and live musicians, and I see a lot of young composers today work with samples in a really great way, but they've never worked with a live musician, and then they suddenly get the chance to work with a live musician or an ensemble, and they have no idea, first of all, how to put it all in sheet music, or how what to look for, what to react to when they record, and how it's all gonna sound in the end. Um, so that is an important process, and I'm excited to have done this with this album, and it kind of also informed for me, continuing in my film music endeavors or media music endeavors, to just always insist on a live musician, which is something I always tried, but sometimes you get pushback, or
Right.
it's a budgetary constraint, or it's a like, why do we need it? The sample sounds so good. I mean, I have actually this reel that I sent to filmmakers now, like, hey, look, I have these 10 projects here. Here's the before and the after, right? Here's the mock-up, here's the live
Right.
version. Do you still think we don't
Mhm.
need the live instruments? And always the answer is, oh wow, okay, I want the live version. Make it happen. So
Mhm.
anyway, I think, unless it's something is a very electronic score, I'm more determined than ever to just always include a live performance. Bring in, even if it's
Mhm.
just one musician, it just elevates it. And I think, like, to the earlier point with the AI, just to distinguish yourself and just to be like, give something a production value of like, hey, this is a live performance by a fantastic musician or musicians. You cannot replicate it with your little box here. For
It's
now.
true. It's true. There's like a depth and yeah,
Yeah,
a human element to it, for sure. And then as you're composing, though, I think that element of knowing that there's going to be a musician, and with I guess an organic instrument, you can even think, okay, in this register of this instrument, it's going to sound a little bit more harsh, or this register, it's going to sound sweet. And did you take those sort of things into consideration as you were composing?
absolutely, yes. And obviously, I've been drawing on my experience of, over a decade recording with live orchestras, and also
Yeah.
concert projects, and also knowing the musicians, because some of the musicians I specifically selected are, I really like this violist and Munich, or I really
Hmm.
like this cellist. Um, so that is definitely consideration. And I think either way, you're gonna have surprises. Even if you're a very experienced, musician, maybe there will be less and less surprises. But those humans, they also might have a good day or a bad day. Sometimes you have to like adjust something. sometimes certain things just don't sound the way you imagined them, and you either live with it, or you adjust on the spot, or you go try to fix it later somehow. So, but this is part of the magic and part of the process, and I think more often than not, you get positive surprises. Yeah, that you get something like, wow, this sounds even so much better than I could have imagined, because the samples cannot imagine it. The samples cannot replicate it. They cannot replicate that unexpected and that like little imperfections that make it just awesome.
Mm-hmm. So following up on that, on the recording, I know that some albums are recorded, you'll do the drummer by itself, or you'll do the guitar by itself. With classical, sometimes you find that they'll record together in a little ensemble more. How did you approach it? Did you have the ensembles play together, or did you do one track
we
at a
had,
time?
for the majority of the pieces, we had ensemble play together. So the two pieces that I mentioned, for example, Fontana dell'Anima with the string orchestra, they were all together in a room. There were no like overdubs. There were no like, I did like 3 takes, and I think I did the 2 of them together. But there were no like, oh, I want to change this bass note, because you cannot. Yeah, you cannot. Oh, I want this swell to be different. So I spent a good time to like get it into the right spot, and I like time budgeted a little bit more time than I would have maybe for a film music project where there's like so little time, right? It's maybe also you don't have this kind of complexity in a piece. But yes, for that I did everyone together in a room. For Lourdes, I did almost everyone. The harp was in a separate room that was just for recording considerations. Yeah, so, and the vocalist I recorded later on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
But those other 7 instruments, they were all in the same room. There's another chamber music piece where I actually played piano with an ensemble, with a string quintet and some clarinets. We were all together in the room. I was conducting from the piano and playing along. There's some solo piano pieces, so those obviously were just recorded with the soloist. And there's another more cinematic piece where I recorded the piano to a click track, because I knew I was gonna then go to Bratislava to record the strings. And that's the final piece, the piece called Prayer, I recorded with the cellist, so it's just the cellist and me. And it's a wonderful cellist named Eva Brunner from Germany. She's originally from the Czech Republic, so we have that kind of connection. We both were basically born in the same country and emigrated to Germany, and she's a wonderful cellist, and you can check her out on Spotify. She has a big audience, and yeah, I invited her to play this piece, and she put so much emotion into this very contemplative piece called Prayer. And we were together in the room. I was at the grand piano, on this nice Bösendorfer grand piano, and she was at her cello. And when you have that kind of situation, you cannot edit, but that's part of the magic. You don't go back and say, oh, I like this other take from the cello more, the other take of myself more. Well, you have to pick, because it's all together. Certain energy, you cannot replicate. And I think we have become accustomed to make everything perfect. And I mean, obviously in pop music, I think it reached a point where, it's, I think, too much, because, when you think of the early pop music stars and the Beatles, or a band like Queen, or let's say rock music, Led Zeppelin, those are not perfect takes or by any means. You sometimes hear the singer being a little bit flat, but it's amazing. They were so good and spot on, and even if it's a little bit here or here, or the timing is not 100% edited right, the performance is fantastic, and that's what you want. And yeah, unless something is a huge mistake where you want to move a whole thing somewhere else or re-record it, I'm not a fan of editing that much, because it usually doesn't really make it better. It's for the overall vibe. So So yeah, so that was my process. As much as possible, everyone in the same room, and just let the magic happen. No regrets.
Well, that's good. So as you were, you had said earlier that you were a bit more, you felt more naked or vulnerable because this was all just you coming out of your own musical soul. Did you ever find yourself getting emotional hearing your music coming from these live musicians?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm basically anytime. I mean, with the strings, there's such a magical moment. You sit up there in the booth and you see those 25 musicians, I think were the string ensemble, and you hear them playing the first swell. You usually light up or get tears in your eyes, because it's just, you cannot replicate that. And also those solo piano pieces that I mentioned, it was such a wonderful full circle moment, because my mentor, when I was finishing high school and I was trying to make my way and figure out what is the next step, my piano teacher in high school, Jonas Kvarnström, is a wonderful pianist and also composer, and he kind of became my mentor back then, of encouraging me, hey, David, you're so creative, you should pursue media music or film music. You of course can practice your instrument a lot, but I think further down the road, this is where it will take you, because this is what you have. Not everyone has it. Some people are fantastic at just devoting their life to an instrument and not trying to be creative.
Yep.
So he always encouraged me a lot. And when it came to do this album, and I had this trilogy of 3 piano pieces called Eon, Eno, Eon, and Neo. So, it's kind of like a permutation. And that's why also the title of this album is One, because that's another permutation. And then I'm like, that came after the fact. I'm like, I have this 3-letter piano pieces. What can I also do with it? Oh, one. Perfect. Yeah, this is the number one.
Oh, no way.
So yeah, I actually ended up asking him, because I was so busy with writing more music and producing and finishing another film project. And I'm like, do I want to record myself, or do I want to try someone else record my piano music? And I asked him, and he was super excited by the idea. So I ended up sending him the sheet music, and he, showed up to the studio, and he just nailed it. It was fantastic. And he brought in a different energy into it that I would have done, because he's a performer, he's an interpreter, right? So he will suggest certain things, he will play something differently than you would have. And I'm so glad I did that, because, it kind of expanded to become bigger than I by myself would have been able to do it. So that was such a wonderful full circle moment, and also very emotional, because, he was my teacher and mentor back then. And now it's 20 years later, I'm like, hey, Jonas, you want to play these 3 pieces and record them? And yeah, so I'm very...
Oh, I can only imagine how emotional that could have been. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's, I'm just sitting there thinking about how that would feel. That must have been just such an incredible moment for you.
Very special moment. And yeah.
Oh, yeah. So this album's coming out in October. Are there plans for more concert music, or is this kind of like a...
Yes. Oh, yeah? I think this whole process, I mean, when I went into it, I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea if no one would care to listen to it, which is not the motivation to do it, but, I was excited to do it for myself. And creatively, I learned so much. And like I said, it was a wonderful, emotionally rewarding journey. But at the end of the day, you also wanted to resonate with people. And the feedback so far from the pieces that were released as singles was fantastic. And also with that award nomination, more than I could have ever, imagined. And I'm just excited where else it will go. And I'm just getting started, because I'm so excited that, I came back to this kind of creativity and this kind of writing music for just the music itself. And I think it's great, because like I said, we talked about AI, and we talked about, humans just hopefully appreciating the live performance more. And I think just also the community aspect of it, reconnected. I mean, I've been in touch with Jonas over the years, but we just reconnected even more in the process of this project and with some other musicians in Munich and in Bratislava. There's such a community aspect to it and such an amazing energy that comes to it when you work with other people. And I love it. So I will definitely continue as soon as this album is released. I'm like back at my desk or at my piano, and I'm like, okay, what's the next number two? What's the album number two? And
oh, please name it number two. I think
maybe
that's
yes,
great.
we'll see about that.
Yeah, that's so great. I have so enjoyed chatting with you. If you have any, just finishing up, if you have any advice for young aspiring musicians or aspiring composers, what would it be?
I think it's a very long journey. I mean, it was for me. Maybe for you, it's a short journey, and suddenly you have success in 1 month. But I think we grew up in a time where we talked about it. Everything is so quickly accessible, so disposable, and everything is just at our fingertips. But the journey that kind of like, you work on something for years, maybe decades, and you develop your career and you have so many, side turns. Just be patient, be flexible, and you have your vision in your head, and if it takes 10 years, if it takes 20 years, it takes that. If you have to move over to a different continent, well, that's what it takes, I mean, I cannot, appreciate enough every step I have taken on this journey. And, I've met so many amazing people. I've started a whole new life in the United States. I met my wife here. We now have twins. It's, all of that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have followed the calling of music, So I think, if it's in you and you want to listen to that call and you want to follow it, I mean, it's, sounds like a cliche. Follow your heart. But I think why not? Because there's enough people who will maybe not have the courage to do it. So you should do it.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, David Bertok, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. I'm so excited for the release of your album. I will be buying it because I'm old-fashioned. I like buying albums. So I'm going to buy it. I'm going to listen to it. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine, and all the best to you and Ross. And yeah,